Hi everyone. We're going to speak a little bit about how we can do insight-based leadership training and connect diversity to value. So around 2015, there were numerous reports coming out that linked diversity to value creation, but they didn't really say how do you get the value out of diversity. And there was a saying in the private sector and public sector that diversity could be the new gold mine, so everyone were looking to how can we become more diverse. But the truth is that diversity doesn't automatically yield better results. Diversity brings a lot of complexity, but also a potential to do better. So whether you deal with the complexity in a good way and you actually get to the value that diversity can bring, that depends on how you manage diversity in the organization. And our job is to figure out what that depends on. So every organization is a village of its own, with its own culture, with its own way of doing things. So there is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to releasing diversity potential. So you need to figure out what is the truth and what is the culture in your organization and how is that hindering or promoting diversity potential.
All right, so as Mano said, this is kind of the old model, so to speak. But at this point, we have analyzed something like 7,000 data points in Norway across a multitude of different industries. I mean, it's retail, arts, oil and gas, whatever you want to point a stick at, we've been there. And this simplified model has been proven not to work. As he said, it all depends. And it also is individual to the organization. The mistake is often to take US research in particular and transfer it to individual organizations far from wherever they did the original research, and that has shown to be wrong. So, there has to be a different approach. And when we say that something depends, statistically speaking, we have to do something called multimediation analysis. So basically, as you bring more diversity into the organization, you see, as I said, that there's more complexity, but how that complexity is handled is mapped through the psychosocial variables individual to the organization. So, when we work, we come into the organization and we see this kind of thing, all right? We see that the diversity we map out through statistical methods, they do affect well-being, but also other variables like sick leave, turnover, how much billable hours you have per person, things like that. But we can also say, well, how does that happen? In this particular picture, you see that the main variables of interest are authenticity and development opportunities, which is, competence utilization, which is something that we could typically see. So if we're going to work with this particular organization, we would say, well, for diversity, we need to do something about the ability to be authentic. Is there enough psychological safety here? That kind of thing. We also have to look at whether or not people, especially diverse people, get to utilize their competence in their jobs. And that's where we have to look to see how we can create more value for the company. And this is another example of the same kind. Here you see, instead of well-being, we have billable hours. So it's both the soft variables and the hard variables. This makes it possible for organizations to create business cases out of something that is often perceived as a very soft domain. We can transfer that into, hardline, billable hours, for example, sick leave, turnover, things that do matter to the bottom line. Also, when we are saying diversity, we have an expanded model of what diversity is. At least in Norway, most of when you hear people talk about diversity, it boils down to either ethnicity or gender. We also map out things like age, neurodiversity, socioeconomic class, all the things that contribute to the diversity experience. In addition, we also look at perspectives or perspective diversity, which means that all of us here have our perspectives, our opinions, our feelings and so on under the hood. That is also shown to be very, very important in the workplace for performance. So, sir?
Yeah. So what we do when we work with organization is that we use the method that Jakob described to do an analysis of what is happening in your village, right? So that's the organization. And based on that, we tailor-make a leadership or a training program, and then we measure again after we've conducted it to see if you got the bottom line result you wanted. So for example, if your aim was to improve subjective well-being in the organization, we do the analysis, we see how much subjective well-being is affected by diversity, we do the training, and then we measure again to see if your diversity sensitivity for subjective well-being has gone down afterwards. So what we base all this on, and why diversity is important, is that leadership is usually easy when it comes to similarities. So if you apply your leadership skills, but you select people who are the same as you, leadership is quite easy. But leadership becomes challenging when you introduce diversity. And it could be a little bit diversity that's introduced, or a lot. And how the world is, and the way the world is developing right now with more globalization, more diversity coming into workplaces, diversity competence is a basic leadership skill. That is something that every organization needs to focus on when developing leaders for the future. And this is our slogan. So what we do is to build future or diversity-ready organizations through statistical methods and tailor-made leadership training programs. And our primary goal is to take diversity from something that you do out of sympathy to something you do to create value. So looking at how we can create value based on the differences that exist in the organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.